Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
And you think, wow, I'm going to be saddled with this the rest of my life. Or if I make this decision to marry this person, then I've got to be faithful and loving throughout the rest of this married life. Or I decide to take this particular job, I'm going to have to work at it, and so on. So I think that's a good link-up that you've made there, and it takes us, right along the path here that Mary is following, because we are dealing with a momentous decision, for sure.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Sister Geraldine Nowak, who is a pastoral associate at St. Ignatius Catholic Church in Toledo. Father Bacik and Sister Nowak will discuss Advent and Mary of Nazareth. And now, here is Father Bacik.
Geraldine, I think one of the interesting things of the Advent season are the great figures that it raises up for us. I believe in life we're often looking for role models, that very often what we're talking about in terms of a proper religious life is exemplified for us in flesh and blood people. A lot of times in theology these days we talk about narrative approaches in which we say the stories of people are what is often most enlightening to us. We have the old Greek philosophers' idea that if you want to know what a virtue is, you should look at a virtuous person, not to talk about it in the abstract. And I think a lot of times religious language has been that way. We come up with abstract statements, with general rules, sort of divorced from experience or reality. And I think very often we miss something that way. And so one of the beauties of the Advent season is that we get these concrete figures, these great people from the Scriptures that we encounter. One of them that comes forth on the fourth Sunday of Advent is the great King David. Takes us back to about 1,000 years before Christ. And David, the son of Saul, and put forward as the great king of Israel. He's been called by God and taken as a young man, and we have all of those stories connected with David of taking his slingshot and killing the giant, the Philistine, and the other kind of stories where David falls and commits adultery with Bathsheba, and his encounter with the great prophet Nathan, and so on. So, and he's put forward as the psalmist. So, boy, when you start talking about David, you've got a real live flesh and blood person here before us, one with tremendous faults but also magnificent virtues, and one who lived life completely and fully. We think of David as one dancing before the ark of God, and a passionate kind of person, a poetic, creative person. So that's one of the Advent figures that come to us in the fourth Sunday of Advent, and David is related then, of course, to the coming Messiah, because when Jesus comes, he's thought about as being the great son of David, of carrying on David's tradition, and of fulfilling the promise made to David that there would be someone occupying his throne forever. So we get David, and we get the great prophet Isaiah, and we get John the Baptist, another colorful kind of figure here. He's out in the desert and eating grasshoppers and dressed in rough clothing and willing to take on the establishment, and is thrown in prison and beheaded. So, we're dealing here with people of flesh and blood. I think of John the Baptist doubts. He wonders if Jesus is really the Messiah or not. So the great figures, and I suppose of all the figures, and a lengthy introduction, I guess, to where we're going here, but is to talk about Mary of Nazareth, maybe the greatest of the figures of the Advent season. And the fourth Sunday of Advent, we read from Luke's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 26 to 38, which is the Annunciation to Mary. And to set the stage for this, and then Geraldine, I'm going to want you to comment on it, but why don't you first read that passage to us so that we know what we're working with here.
From Luke's Gospel. The angel Gabriel was sent from God to a town of Galilee named Nazareth, to a virgin betrothed to a man named Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. Upon arriving, the angel said to her, "Rejoice, O highly favored daughter, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women." She was deeply troubled by these words and wondered what this greeting meant. The angel went on to say to her, "Do not fear, Mary. You have found favor with God. You shall conceive and bear a son and give him the name Jesus. Great will be his dignity, and he will be called Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of David his father. He will rule over the house of Jacob forever, and his reign will be without end." Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I do not know man?" The angel answered her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Hence, the holy offspring to be born will be called Son of God. Know that Elizabeth, your kinswoman, has conceived a son in her old age. She who was thought to be sterile is now in her 6th month, for nothing is impossible with God." Mary said, "I am the maidservant of the Lord. Let it be done to me as you say." With that, the angel left her.
I was thinking, Geraldine, as you read that it does allow our imaginations to roam a bit. At least that's what I've been trying to do with this passage, and to sort of reconstruct it in my own mind, and to fill in some of the blanks, and to maybe feel some of the emotions that might go on here. I think the story is so familiar that we often fill it in with our understandings that we had as youngsters when we first heard the story. And I think it's good to maybe try to let our adult imaginations roam over the passage a bit. I begin to pick up a lot of tones of the deep emotions involved. In other words, I'm getting a picture here of Mary, a young woman, maybe 12, 13, 14 years old, who's in love with a man named Joseph. I think of her as longing to be with Joseph, of wanting this engagement period to move forward to their marriage as they had planned it. A lot of the marriages, of course, were arranged, and I'm sure a lot of people were not in love with the spouse that was chosen for them, but my imagination makes me think of Mary really loving Joseph, of having a deep relationship and a strong physical urging to be with Joseph. It's that kind of thing that begins to put flesh and blood on it, at least for me. I mean, I'm sure everyone's imagination would go in different ways here, but that's a way of starting for me, at least, to feel some of the emotions that I think would be happening in relationship to this passage. Do you want to go any place with that, or any of the other imagery that came forth to you out of that passage?
Well, first of all, just the emotion that you mentioned, that I think that we're quite familiar with this story as being a part eventually to get on with the Christmas story, and for somehow, our images of Christmas and the birth of Christ and the whole thing is always so neatly packaged that we don't always realize the emotion of crisis involved. For example, mentioning the tone that you had picked up, and then Mary being so troubled by this message. I can't help but think that there had to be a lot of anxiety that she felt, or bewilderment, or just and when those kinds of things happen in our own life, how it's not a neat, clean, very happy, and they lived happily ever. I mean, you have to go through quite a process to figure all that out. So just picking up on Mary actually hearing that.
Mm-hmm. I would say what comes across to me in that line is that we are dealing here with a very deep religious experience, very strong sense of the presence of God, and that very often historically when people were in the presence of God, felt it in a striking way, that fear was part of their emotional response. It's like, I'm unworthy to be in the presence of this power. I'm not really capable of responding to it. It leaves me speechless. I don't know what to do about it. That it feels painful in many ways. So we've got a lot of examples of that in the Hebrew Scriptures that Mary would be very familiar with. The notion of being in God's presence would be almost overwhelming. So that her people used to say, well, to look at God face to face, you would surely die. Or even to touch the Ark of the Covenant where God's Spirit was, God's glory was over top of the Ark of the Covenant. There was this notion that if you touched the Ark, you could die from that this power was so overwhelming. So Mary, I think, stands in the line of her own Hebrew Scriptures that saw the awesome character of this. You had to hide your face if God was around. You dared not look directly at God. So we're dealing here with the deepest kind of religious experience. So in that sense, the words of Luke, she was deeply troubled by the words, by this encounter and this call, this invitation from on high. That is, to me at least, a very understandable reaction. I think our deepest religious experiences have that character. Now, as I say that, I think we'd have to try to validate that in our own experience. and I don't know exactly where we need to go to do that. Some people might think of a time when they've gone into a dark church at night and maybe they felt a little creepy about it, there's a sense of awe that comes over one. Or when we've been in the presence of overwhelming virtue that we've seen someone else exercise and we feel, wow, that's unbelievable how good that person handled that, or what a fine response that was that she made there. So I'm looking for that awe in our own experience that gives us this sense of a fearsome kind, so we would have some sense of what Mary's going through here. Anything come to you like that?
Well, as you're talking about the fear, it sort of sounds like, well, it was just very natural and understandable that fear was there. And the image that's coming to me is many times when people have a retreat experience, or when people take time to reflect, not necessarily on a retreat, but this moment of insight that comes, and that there are consequences down the road that one is not sure how that's all going to work out. And so then there is that moment of fear, but that it more or less says, well, that's natural. It's all right. This is a profound thing, and it sort of brings up the whole process of discernment then, and what discernment's all about, and that fear and that astonishing revelation is a part of a discernment process.
Well, I think that links up very well with what the Scriptures are intending here, because Mary maybe begins to get the drift that something big is upon her here, and that there are decisions to be made, and that they will have consequences. So you're linking it with retreat moments, or moments when we know that the stakes are high, and that whatever we decide is going to have tremendous consequences down the road. That maybe that puts us in touch with the experience. That is awesome. And you think, wow, I'm going to be saddled with this the rest of my life. Or if I make this decision to marry this person, then I've got to be faithful and loving throughout the rest of this married life. Or I decide to take this particular job, I'm going to have to work at it, and so on. So I think that's a good link-up that you've made there, and it takes us, right along the path here that Mary is following, because we are dealing with a momentous decision for sure.
The other image that is mentioned often in this particular passage is the one of angel. And I guess what that reminds me of is that Mary was sort of receiving this message, but someone was bringing this to her. It was a message coming from somewhere, and that not only was this angel bringing the message and announcing it, and therefore eliciting those deep emotions of being troubled, of having fear, but also it was an assuring. Later on, you have found favor with God. So there's that messenger is also offering some sense of comfort. So possibly when those big those religious moments happen, or when we are in God's presence, that once again we're not even alone. We're zeroing in on Mary here, but there's a secondary figure, the angel, and how important this angel is. I think we think of Mary, but again, upon reflecting, I think we can be Mary in this gospel, but sometimes we might have been that angel for another person, or if in our own reflecting on how this applies to our own life, we're not alone.
So that you're linking the word angel with messenger. I mean, that's your main idea there, that a message comes. It isn't fabricated, brought up out of one's own unconscious, or simply projected out of one's own needs. The notion of messenger suggests something objective happening, doesn't it? That there is actually a call from without. Again, today we have a lot of this sense that religious experiences are nothing but subjective, that they're just mine. And then we've got the critique of the skeptics of religion that say, well, it is just fabricated, projected out of needs, and so on. And the angel image here gives it this more objective character, I suppose. So a message is given, a messenger is there.
And I think how that plays out in ordinary life is many times another person may come and ask us to do something, or another person may come and say, I would like you to think about this. And the response often is like, well, I don't think that, I can do that. I've heard parishioners a number of times at the end of some project or an experience or a role that they've been called upon, that the end part is real successful, and in their success they start going back to how this happened, and they'll always go back to someone, well, you asked me to do it, and I know how fearful I was. I didn't think I could do that. I couldn't, be in charge of that committee. I couldn't, do that particular theme. So upon their successful moment, they're reflecting. And again, then, in the sense of religious experience, messenger could be person, place, or event that calls that forth from us.
Excellent, yeah, and that really makes it contemporary, because most people have not directly encountered angels. At least they don't talk about their experiences in those ways. Of course, in the biblical world, that was common to talk both about angels and devils. That was part of their worldview. So if they had a deep religious experience and felt the call from outside themselves, it would be very natural for them to put it in terms of an angel's presence. And here we have the angel Gabriel linked up with, again in Mary's mind, no doubt, with the Gabriel who appeared to Daniel in the Scriptures and with a message. So I like the way you're saying it, because it gives us a way of understanding angel that is more contemporary. So our angels would be those people who bring us messages. And as you said, not only people, but situations, events that we go through. And I think, again, that gives a lot of our deeper religious experience an objective side. It's not just manufactured or our own interests and whims, but there is a call. Life calls us, events call us, people call us, and I think a lot of what we accomplish in life, or the virtue we achieve, or the way we move forward, is due precisely to those challenging messages.
Also, the other image of outside of person, place, or event, I was thinking of a person's own intuition. Many times people, when things happen, they'll say, oh, if only I would have really done what I really want to do. Intuitively, they felt a way that it should go. So many times that call coming in an intuitive sense, where maybe it's not the person, place, or event, but one's own intuition. And many times the struggle that people have to go through to come to know that their intuition is something that they can trust.
Okay, Geraldine, let's go on here. I think you've already, the next part says, the angel went on to say to her, do not fear, Mary, you have found favor with God. And you've already suggested to us that the religious experience has a positive side as well, and that the messages are not always challenging, but can be comforting, that we receive from others and from life situations. Do not fear, you have found favor with God. You're in God's hands, taken care of by God. And then the core of the message that is announced her, you shall conceive and bear a son, and give him the name Jesus. Great will be his dignity, and he will be called Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of David his father, and he will rule over the house of Jacob forever, and his reign will be without end. Well, one thing I'm coming back to is this great figure of David, give you the throne of David, and which takes us back to this first reading for the fourth Sunday of Advent, which is from 2 Samuel chapter 7, and in which it talks a bit about David. And it says there, the Lord also reveals to you that he will establish a house for you, and your house and your kingdom shall endure forever before me. Your throne shall stand forever. That is the prophet Nathan telling David about what is in store for him. And so that begins to link up, I think, with our reading over here. And I wondered if you wanted to do something with some of that imagery, Geraldine. I noticed the house imagery is in there and so on, the house of David. Do you want to say what that might mean?
In that selection, the 2 Samuel, if one would go through that and just notice the house of cedar, the ark of God, the tent, the dwelling place, that just sort of very, I guess, simply but quite profoundly reminds me of how necessary it is to have that place that we call home, or to be at home within ourselves, just to do a lot with that image of home. And probably it's so rooted and so basic within us that once again, many times possibly we don't have those religious experiences, or we're not aware of religious experiences because we don't feel at home with
so
a religious experience.
The image of home makes us feel comforted. That's where we find our roots. That's where we've been nourished. It's the place that we go to for some sort of strengthening. What is it saying? Home is that place where they can't, when you come there, they can't refuse to let you in or something. I'm forgetting that entirely. I don't know why I brought that up, Geraldine, because I don't remember the saying, but there's something like that. And anyway, home is a neat place, and it ought to have comforting kind of images connected with it. And here it said, he will rule over the house of Jacob forever, and his reign will be forever. And I guess the link-up is that Jesus Christ is now inhabiting this throne of David, and he will rule over all of the people, and this reign that he's establishing will have these sort of home-like characters. In the kingdom, everyone will feel welcomed, and everyone will feel a sense of rootedness. People will know that they are secure, that they are surrounded by the power of God's Spirit, and that they are held in God's hands. So part of the kingdom notion, I think, carries through that home, tent, dwelling place imagery that's found in 2 Samuel and these readings for the fourth Sunday of Advent.
And that could just offer one the opportunity to, to reflect on homelessness. A thought I remember once from a talk was the idea of if you don't feel at home in the home that you are living, then you are homeless. I think homeless, we think of the people on the streets, but that many times I've also heard people say something like, in terms of being with another person, well, I like to be with you because I feel at home with you. So just, I just think it offers a lot to reflect on, and that it's one of those things that almost one has to put oneself into a mood of reflection and let those images come.
I agree with that. It goes on here to a crucial point. Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I do not know man?" So Mary is showing some critical intelligence here and some realism. She has not had sexual relationships, and she's not yet married, so how is she going to have this child?
What I like particularly about that is that just from Scripture, that in a discernment process, that's a part of discernment, is to ask the questions. Many times I think when we're approached about something, we think we have to give an immediate answer. We're not really ready to give an immediate answer. And, Mary's doing this. I mean, she's just very, very logical. Well, it's just, well, of course, how can this happen? So once again, to take confidence that it's all right to question, it's all right to gather evidence, it's all right to get the information before one makes a decision.
And not just all right, but imperative if we're going to function well. And I think that's where Mary becomes a good kind of guide again. We might have to do a little negative critique here, because I think very often Mary has been put in another light of being sort of passive dependent, that her main virtue was receptivity and obedience. And this part of the story reminds us that Mary was an assertive person and took command of a situation and was willing to think for herself and to ask the difficult questions. And I believe that, again, she becomes a more believable role model. We really must get rid of the saccharine, sanitized images of Mary if she's going to be a true Advent figure for us. And this sentence here is crucial to all of that. She knows the score, and she asks the right questions, and she moves the conversation forward in a telling way. She uses critical intelligence. She becomes a real model for us in this, I believe.
You took the word assertive right out of my mouth, and and again, I think we could do a lot just with this one sentence in terms of women today. One does not need to be submissive and accept everything just because someone is saying it. God himself, the angel bringing this message, Mary had the courage to confront that. And again, it's certainly just from the tone of that, it sounds like Mary really did that in the true sense of being assertive, not aggressive, but that her tone was one that, it was just a logical question. And I guess, I'd like to probably even think more about, what tone was that?
Yes, I can see that. I believe that extends into the next part, to jump ahead a little bit, because I think she shows an assertive side in another way. That is, I could imagine Mary, as she's interacting with the angel here and hearing that the Holy Spirit will be upon her, the power of the Most High will overshadow you, and so on, telling her in many ways this is special, this is a unique event. God is involved here. This is a matter of dependency upon God. And I can imagine Mary with a moment of temptation saying, this is too much. I got to get out of here. I need time to stop and think. And my imagination takes me this way. I better go talk to Joseph about it. Joseph will know the answer to this. I'll let Joseph make the decision. He'll handle all of this. This is what we might expect in a patriarchal society. And yet, Mary comes across, she doesn't take time to consult with Joseph, a key figure in the whole story. She makes the decision herself, on her own, and fully cognizant of what is happening, and gets around to the really crucial point of saying, let it be done to me as you say. And I think that we could build that part of it up as well to get some sort of psychological sense of what made Mary tick. We don't get a sense of dependency at all, but of a very independent woman.
Mary must have been very confident in who she was. I guess I think that many times we think we need to consult with people, particularly when maybe we don't feel confident about our own inner ability, our own inner authority. And again, a true image for women, the idea of being confident in who you are, that you do have your own gifts. And so she was able to make this decision because of her sense of confidence about herself.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And when you begin to look at that side of Mary as an Advent figure, I think a whole lot of other things come to mind. If you read the rest of the Gospels in that light, and take, for example, her famous prayer, the Magnificat, you get, again, a woman who's very aware of what is happening. She understands the consequences of this whole birth, that she's going to give birth to one who's going to challenge the establishment. The new one who is coming is going to say, we need a new world order. We got to change the way human relationships work. And the rich are going to be sent away empty. They're going to be pulled down from their thrones, and the lowly will be raised up, and the lowly will have their fill to eat. So Mary, I think, understands there are consequences in the political, social realm of her saying yes to this call of the angel. Her son, the son of David, will be one who is going to speak a challenging message that will need to be heard by both rich and poor alike.
And in her saying yes, I guess another image of women in strength is that I think, I'm thinking about the idea of being able to surrender, to be able to let go, to say yes, that really does involve just, I think, the utmost of strength to be able to do that. So again, another quality to reflect on in terms of a strength of who she was as a woman.
And that you had mentioned confidence too, right, in that regard before.
But the emphasis there on just the dynamic of what it takes internally to just surrender to something, and to acknowledge it, to let go and say, well, let it happen, and that saying that yes to that new world order that only, I think, and probably some people that I know, men as well as women, that have done that, have had. They're just their characters, their personality is just the most admirable.
Yes, I agree with that, and it points out the power of Mary as a model for that kind of life. I like your point that to say yes requires strength. It's not a passive dependency. It requires a confidence and a strength that we need to keep in mind here. So, Geraldine, what we've done is try to raise up this figure of Mary as found in Luke's first chapter, verses 26 to 38, and we try to see in her one who is responsive to the call of God and does so out of a real self-confidence and becomes a good model of a proper and healthy assertiveness for all of us.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Sister Geraldine Nowak, who is a pastoral associate at St. Ignatius Roman Catholic Church in Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was Advent and Mary of Nazareth. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Minister, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio, 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.